Welcome back to Bargirl Baddies. Today's story hits different because it's not about some young bloke chasing adventure or a midlife crisis that spiraled out of control in a few wild months. This one's about a man who did everything by the book, worked his whole life, played by the rules, and thought he'd finally earned the right to be happy. His name is Derek. He's 58 years old, from Perth, Australia, and he genuinely believed he'd found his retirement paradise and the love of his life in Thailand. Instead, he discovered something far more painful. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't even really a partner. He was a financial strategy with a heartbeat. And by the time he realized it, he'd already lost nearly everything that was supposed to carry him through his golden years. This isn't a story about stupidity. It's about loneliness. About what happens when a man who spent decades being useful suddenly needs to feel wanted. And how that need can be weaponized by someone who sees opportunity instead of a person. Before we get into Derek's words, do me a favour, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been in a relationship where you felt more like a wallet than a human being, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone, and Derek's story might just save you from making the same mistakes he did. Alright, here's Derek, in his own words. My name's Derek Patterson, and I'm writing this from a studio apartment in Chiang that cost me about a quarter of what I used to spend on rent back in Perth, which should tell you everything about how far I've fallen. I'm 58 years old, recently divorced after 28 years of marriage, and I've got 2 grown kids who barely return my calls, even on their birthdays. For 35 years, I worked construction management, good money, solid career, the kind of job where you wear down your knees and your patience in equal measure. But you get to retire with something to show for it. Or at least, that was the plan. The divorce wasn't dramatic. No affairs, no big blowout fights, just decades of slowly realizing we'd become roommates who shared a mortgage and not much else. Linda wanted the house, I wanted out, and the lawyers made sure we both got a bit of what we wanted and a lot of what we didn't. When the papers were finally signed, I moved into a 1-bedroom rental near the city, and that's when the loneliness really hit me. Not the sad kind you see in movies, more like this low-grade emptiness that coloured everything grey. I'd wake up, go to the gym, work 10-hour days on site in Perth's brutal, bloody heat, then hit the pub with the same 3 mates who talk about football and their own failing marriages, then go home to a flat that echoed when I walked through it. It was mechanical. Wake up, work, gym, pub, sleep, repeat. The weekends were worse because at least during the week I had the rhythm of routine to distract me. Saturdays, I'd do my shopping, meal prep for the week, like some fitness influencer. Except I was just trying to fill time. Then I'd sit in front of the television, watching rugby or cooking shows or whatever was on, drinking beer until I was tired enough to sleep. Sundays, I'd tell myself I should call the kids. Then I'd stare at my phone for an hour, convincing myself they were busy, they had their own lives, they didn't need their old man bothering them. My mates kept talking about Thailand. Jono had been twice, came back with stories about $5 meals and beaches and how far your money goes over there. How you could live like a king on what barely covered rent in Perth. He'd show us photos on his phone, sunset over some island, plates of food that looked like they came from a restaurant but cost less than a coffee back home, always a beer in his hand, and this grin like he'd figured out some secret the rest of us were too stupid to see. I'd always dismissed it as fantasy, as what blokes like us told ourselves when real life got too heavy. But one night, about 4 months after the divorce was finalised, I couldn't sleep, and I found myself on my laptop, scrolling through retirement forums, reading stories about men who packed up their lives and started over in Southeast Asia. The numbers were mad. You could rent a decent apartment for $300–400 a month, eat out every meal for less than what groceries cost in Australia. The weather was warm year-round, no more freezing through winter or roasting through summer, just this consistent tropical heat that sounded like permission to slow down. I read dozens of posts from blokes my age or older, talking about Chiang specifically, how it had everything you needed, modern enough to feel comfortable, Thai enough to feel exotic, cheap enough that your pension actually meant something. There was this one post I kept coming back to, written by a guy from Melbourne who said he'd been living there 3 years and spent less annually than he used to spend on his mortgage alone. He talked about morning coffees at cafes where they knew his name, afternoons reading in parks, evenings at markets that stretched for blocks. A pace of life that didn't demand anything from you, except that you show up and exist. I should have been skeptical. I should have thought about visa complications and language barriers, and all the practical reasons why uprooting your entire life at 58 is a terrible idea. But instead, I thought about my flat in Perth, about the silence that greeted me every time I walked through the door, about the fact that I could disappear tomorrow and it would take days before anyone noticed. So I booked a ticket. Exploratory trip, I told myself. 2 weeks in Chiang Mai, see what all the fuss was about, probably hate it, and come home with the fantasy out of my system. The heat hit me the second I stepped off the plane, like walking into an oven. But it was a dry heat, different from Perth's humid summer suffocation. I took a red taxi to the apartment I'd rented on Airbnb, a modest place near Nimmenhamin Road, the driver chattering in broken English about where I was from, how long I was staying, if this was my first time. Everything felt foreign in that exciting way travel does when you're genuinely open to it. The signs in Thai script I couldn't read, the smell of street food I couldn't identify, the sound of motorbikes buzzing past like angry hornets. The first few days, I just wandered. I'd wake up without an alarm for the first time in decades, grab coffee from a cart on the corner where the lady always smiled even though we couldn't communicate beyond pointing and nodding. Then I'd walk for hours with no destination. Night markets that sold everything from fake designer bags to fried insects. Temples with golden spires that caught the sun and made you squint. Cafes where university kids sat with laptops and iced coffees that cost 30 baht, less than $2. I'd end my evenings at this small bar I found called Lucky's. Nothing fancy, just a street-side spot with plastic chairs and warm beer and a mix of locals and expats who all seemed to know each other. That's where I met Nook. She was working behind the bar, 32 years old, with long dark hair she kept in a ponytail, and this laugh that made everyone around her smile. Her English was decent, better than my Thai, which was non-existent, and she had this way of making everyone feel like they were the only customer that mattered. The first night I sat there, she asked where I was from, how I was finding Chiang Mai, if I'd tried the khao soi yet, because if not, I was doing Thailand wrong. We talked for maybe 10 minutes between her serving other customers, nothing deep, just the kind of friendly bartender chat you get anywhere in the world. But I came back the next night, and the night after that. By the fourth visit, she remembered my drink order. Leo beer, no glass, just the bottle. She'd ask about my day, where I'd explored, and she'd give me recommendations, little places tourists never found. The best pad thai cart near the university, a temple up in the hills where you could watch the sunset without crowds of Chinese tour groups. I started looking forward to those conversations, to the way her face lit up when I'd tell her I'd actually followed her advice and found the spot she'd mentioned. She asked about my kids, seemed genuinely sad when I told her we weren't close, told me about her own family upcountry, her mother who was getting older, her younger brother who was a bit of a troublemaker, but had a good heart. I know what you're thinking. I knew what people would think even then. 58-year-old divorced bloke, pretty Thai bartender half his age. It writes itself, doesn't it? But I'm telling you, it felt different with Nook. It felt real. She wasn't overly flirty, wasn't asking me to buy her drinks or hinting about needing money. We just talked, properly talked, about life and family and what makes people happy. She told me she'd worked in Bangkok for a few years but hated the chaos, preferred Chiang Mai's slower pace. She loved cooking, dreamed of opening a small coffee shop someday, something cozy where locals could gather. She asked me about construction, about Australia, about what it was like to work your whole life and then suddenly have to figure out who you are without the job defining you. That last question hit me hard because I'd been avoiding asking it myself. On my 10th night at Lucky's, she finished her shift and asked if I wanted to grab some food. We went to this late-night spot she loved, sat on plastic stools at a folding table, ate some tam and grilled chicken while she taught me how to say basic phrases in Thai. Thank you. Delicious. How much? I felt like a bloody idiot stumbling over the tones, but she was patient, laughing with me, not at me, and somewhere between the papaya salad and the sticky rice, I realised I was happier than I'd been in years. Over the next week, Nook became my guide to her Chiang Mai. On her days off, she'd pick me up on her little motorbike, and we'd ride out to temples I'd never have found on my own, places where monks chanted in the mornings, and the incense hung thick in the air, and everything felt ancient and holy. She took me to the Sunday walking street, not the tourist version, but where locals actually shopped. Showed me how to bargain without being rude. Bought me Thai sweets from a grandmother's cart, and laughed at my face when I bit into something that looked like candy, but tasted like perfume. We went to a night market in the mountains, wound our way up roads that made me grip the seat of her bike, Arrived at this sprawling outdoor market lit by strings of bulbs where hill tribe people sold handmade crafts, and the air smelled like grilled pork and coffee. We ate at a small restaurant with no name, just a family cooking in the back and a few tables in the front. And Nook ordered for both of us, dishes I'd never heard of, flavors that were sweet and sour and spicy all at once. She talked about her dreams, about how she'd always wanted to create something of her own, how working in bars paid the bills but didn't feed her soul, how she imagined a little cafe with plants and good music and a menu that changed with the seasons. I told her about my marriage, about how it had died so slowly neither of us noticed until it was too late to save, about my kids and how I'd worked so much to give them a good life that I'd somehow missed actually being part of it. She listened without judgment, without offering cheap advice, just listened and nodded, and at one point reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said sometimes we have to lose everything to figure out what we actually need. The moment I knew I was hooked, properly hooked, was near the end of my 2 weeks. We rode up to Doi Suthep, the temple that overlooks the whole city, and we stayed until sunset. The tourists had mostly cleared out, and we sat on a wall looking down at Chiang Mai, spread out below us, the lights just starting to flicker on as the sky went from blue to orange to purple. She was in front of me on the bike, my arms around her waist, and I remember thinking this is what alive feels like. Not excitement, not passion exactly, just this deep sense of being present, of mattering to someone who mattered to me, of feeling like maybe the second half of my life didn't have to be a slow fade into irrelevance. I should have wondered why someone like her wanted someone like me. I should have questioned the timing, the convenience, the way every conversation seemed to reveal exactly what I needed to hear. Looking back now, the signs were there from day one, but I was too busy feeling wanted to notice. Or maybe I noticed and didn't care, because the alternative was going back to Perth, back to that empty flat, and those silent weekends, and the crushing realization that I'd worked my whole life to end up alone. On my last night before flying home, Nook cried. Real tears, not the performative kind, or at least that's what I told myself. She said she'd miss me, that she'd gotten used to having me around, that it was rare to meet someone who actually listened. I told her I'd come back, that I'd already started thinking about it, about selling my share of the business, about taking early retirement, about maybe making Chiang Mai more than just a holiday. She looked at me with those dark eyes and said, if you're serious, I'll be here. 3 months later, I sold everything. Gave notice to my business partners, sold my car, put my furniture in storage, packed my life into 2 suitcases. My kids thought I'd lost my mind. Linda said I was having a pathetic midlife crisis. My mates alternated between jealousy and concern, asking if I was sure, if I'd really thought this through, if I knew what I was doing. And honestly, I didn't. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't spend another year waking up to nothing. And Nook represented the possibility of something, even if I couldn't articulate exactly what that something was. When I arrived back in Chiang Mai, Nook was waiting at the airport holding flowers, wearing this sundress I'd never seen before. And when she hugged me, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never actually lived. We moved into a condo together within a week. A nice 2-bedroom place in a modern building with a pool and a gym, not fancy by Australian standards, but comfortable, more space than either of us needed. I paid the deposit, first and last month's rent, $1,500 total, which felt like nothing compared to what I used to spend. Nook said she'd quit working at Lucky's, that she wanted to focus on us, on building a life together. I told her not to rush, that I didn't want her to feel dependent on me, but she insisted. She said she'd been waiting for someone like me, someone stable and kind, someone who saw her as more than just a pretty girl who poured drinks. Those first months felt like a dream I was terrified of waking up from. We'd have coffee on the balcony every morning, her teaching me more Thai, me teaching her random bits of Australian slang that made her laugh. We'd cook together, fumbling through recipes neither of us quite knew how to make, filling the condo with smoke and laughter. She introduced me to her friends, other Thai women, and the occasional expat couple, and we'd go out for dinners that stretched late into the night. I met other foreign men in similar situations, older blokes with younger Thai partners, and we'd joke about our expensive girlfriends. But nobody actually talked about the numbers, about what it really cost to maintain these relationships. But the expenses started creeping in, slow at first, then faster. Her mother up country needed an operation, something with her heart. The local hospital couldn't handle it, needed to go to a private facility in Chiang Mai, $5,000. I didn't hesitate. I wired the money the same day, Nook told me, held her while she cried with relief, felt like a hero for being able to help. A month later, it was her brother. His motorcycle had broken down. He needed it for work, couldn't afford to replace it. Another 2,000. Again, I paid. Nook was so grateful, so loving, told me I was saving her family, that she didn't know what they'd do without me. The coffee shop dream became a constant conversation. She'd found the perfect location, just needed startup capital for the lease, for equipment, for initial inventory, maybe 20,000 to do it right. She showed me sketches she'd drawn, a whole vision for the space, talked about how we could run it together, how it could be our future, our legacy. I told her I'd think about it, that 20,000 was a lot. But even as I said it, I was already calculating how much I had left in my retirement fund, how much I could afford to invest in our dream. Every request came with tears and gratitude and promises. Every time I said yes, Nook would tell me I was different from other men, that I understood what partnership meant, that we were building something real together. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was admitting that I'd upended my entire life for someone who saw me as a solution to problems I was only just starting to understand existed. Just this once became just one more time, became just, until things stabilized. And before I knew it, 6 months had passed, and I'd stopped checking my bank balance because the numbers made my chest tight and my hands shake. I fell into routines without noticing I was falling. That's the thing about comfort. It creeps up on you disguised as contentment, and by the time you realize you're stuck, you've forgotten what moving forward even looks like. My days in Chiang Mai developed a rhythm that felt easy, felt right, felt like exactly what I'd been searching for when I left Perth. I'd wake up around 8, later than I ever did back home, and Nook would already be up making coffee in that cheap plastic drip filter she insisted made it taste better than my fancy French press. We'd sit on the balcony watching the city wake up below us, motorbikes starting to swarm the streets, vendors setting up their carts, the sky shifting from grey to blue as the morning heat started building. After breakfast, I'd hit the gym in our building, nothing serious, just enough to feel like I was taking care of myself. Then I'd shower and usually meet up with a few other expats at a cafe near Nimmenhamen. There was Roger, a British bloke in his early 60s who'd been in Chiang Mai for 5 years, always had stories about visa runs and the best places to get Western food when you were homesick. There was Frank from California, retired tech guy, younger than me, but his wife had died from cancer and he'd sold everything and landed here looking for a reset. And there was Tom, Australian like me, from Brisbane, late 50s, with a Thai girlfriend who was 28 and worked at a massage shop. But Tom swore she was studying to be a nurse. We'd sit there for hours drinking iced coffee and talking about nothing important. Football, politics back home, which restaurants had gone downhill, where to get your visa extended without hassle. We'd joke about our situations, call our girlfriends our retirement plans, laugh about being walking ATMs. But it was always joking, always with this edge of defensiveness. Like, if we acknowledged it was real, we'd have to do something about it. Nobody talked actual numbers. Nobody admitted how much they were spending to keep their Thai dreams afloat. It was like an unspoken rule, don't ask, don't tell. Because once you started comparing notes, you might realize you weren't special, you were just another version of the same transaction happening all over the city. Afternoons I'd wander, sometimes alone, sometimes with Nook if she wasn't busy with errands or visiting friends. I'd explore different neighborhoods, find new coffee shops, sit in parks reading books I'd downloaded on my tablet. The heat was oppressive, but I got used to it, started moving slower, drinking more water, adopting that Thai pace where nothing was urgent and everything could wait until it was cooler. Evenings Nook and I would go out for dinner, try different restaurants, street food stalls, night markets. She always ordered, always knew what was good, and I'd sit there eating things I couldn't pronounce while she told me stories about growing up in her village, about Thai customs I didn't understand, about her dreams for the future that always seemed to include me right at the center. The money kept flowing out, and I kept telling myself it was temporary. Her mother's operation was real. I'd seen the hospital bills, though looking back I never actually verified they matched what I'd paid. The coffee shop was taking longer to materialize than expected, Nook said. The landlord kept changing terms, then the location fell through, and she found a better one. But it needed more renovation work. Then her friend, who was going to help manage it, got pregnant and backed out. There was always a reason, always a next step that required just a bit more capital, just a bit more patience. Her brother's motorcycle got repaired, but then he got into an accident. Nothing serious, but he needed money for the hospital and to fix the bike again. Another 1,500. Nook's cousin was getting married, and family obligations meant we needed to give a generous gift. Cultural expectations I didn't fully understand, but didn't want to disrespect. 2000. The condo rent went up. Nook said the owner was raising it for everyone in the building. Our share of the increase was an extra $300 a month. Her phone broke. She needed a new one to stay in touch with her family. $800 for the model she wanted. Each request made sense in isolation. Each one came with explanations that sounded reasonable, and each time I said yes because saying no meant admitting that maybe this wasn't what I thought it was. I started drinking more. Not falling down drunk, not obvious problem drinking, just more than I used to. A beer with breakfast, because why not, we're in Thailand and it's vacation rules all the time. Beers at lunch with the boys at the cafe. More beers in the afternoon to deal with the heat. Whiskey in the evenings before dinner, then wine with the meal, then more whiskey after, because sleep didn't come as easy as it used to. And the alcohol helped quiet the thoughts that tried to surface when I was alone with my head. The thing about drinking when you're anxious is it works until it doesn't. It smoothed out the rough edges, made me care less about the bank balance I wasn't checking, made Nook's vague answers about money feel less important, made the whole situation feel sustainable when the math clearly said it wasn't. I'd log into my bank app maybe once a month, see the number, feel my stomach drop, then close it and pour another drink and tell myself I'd deal with it later, after the coffee shop opened, after things stabilized, after Nook talked about marriage more frequently. She'd bring it up casually, mention how her family kept asking when we were going to make it official, how it would make everything easier with visas and property ownership, how she wanted to be my wife, not just my girlfriend. She'd show me photos of Thai weddings, talk about how we could do something small, just family, nothing expensive, maybe go to her village so her relatives could meet me properly. I'd nod and say we should think about it. We had time, no need to rush. But really, I was stalling because some part of me, the part that wasn't numbed by routine and beer, knew that marriage would make leaving impossible. I met her family once, about 8 months in. We drove up country to her village, 4 hours north through rice fields and small towns that looked like they hadn't changed in 50 years. Her mother's house was simple, wooden, raised on stilts, chickens wandering underneath, the kind of rural poverty I'd seen in documentaries but never experienced up close. Her mother was tiny, weathered, spoke no English, but smiled and waved and treated me like visiting royalty. Her brother was there, early 20s, cocky in that way young men are everywhere, sizing me up with barely concealed amusement. Various aunts and uncles and cousins appeared. I lost track of who was who. Everyone was friendly in that surface-level way, where you're clearly the foreign curiosity. We stayed for 2 days, and I spent most of it sitting in plastic chairs being fed endless plates of food. I was too polite to refuse, nodding along to conversations I couldn't understand, smiling until my face hurt. Nook translated bits and pieces, told me her mother was so happy she'd found a good man, that her family was grateful for everything I'd done for them, that they were praying the coffee shop would be successful so Nook could help support everyone. That last part stuck with me. The casual assumption that my money wasn't just for Nook, it was for her entire extended family, that I'd somehow become the financial foundation for people I'd just met. On the drive back to Chiang Mai, I asked Nook about it, tried to be gentle, said I wanted to understand the expectations. She got quiet, then sad, then told me I didn't understand Thai culture, that family was everything, that when you love someone you love their family too, that she thought I was different from other Farang who only cared about themselves. I apologised, told her she was right, I was still learning, and we drove the rest of the way in silence while I felt like an asshole for even bringing it up. The coffee shop became my line in the sand, the thing I told myself would change everything. Once it opened, once Nook had her own income, once we had a shared business, then the money drain would stop, then we'd be actual partners, then this whole arrangement would make sense. She'd found a new location, perfect this time, right near the university, good foot traffic, affordable rent. She showed me photos, drew up business plans on napkins, talked about the menu and the aesthetic and how it would be a space for artists and students and locals. She just needed $25,000, slightly more than the original estimate, but this location was better, the investment would pay off faster. I transferred the money on a Tuesday afternoon after 3 whiskeys had made the number feel less terrifying. Nook cried, held me, told me I was making her dreams come true, that she'd never forget this, that we were building our future together. She said she'd start the renovations immediately, that I could be involved in every decision, that in 6 months we'd be sitting in our own cafe watching it thrive. Except the renovations kept getting delayed. The contractor needed more money up front, The permits took longer than expected. The equipment she'd ordered was back-ordered. Every week there was a new reason why I couldn't visit the location, why the timeline was pushed back, why we needed just a bit more patience and just a bit more cash to solve whatever new problem had emerged. I'd asked to see receipts, asked to meet the contractor, asked to be more involved, and Nook would get hurt, ask why I didn't trust her, remind me that this was her culture and her language and her business expertise, and I needed to let her handle it. So I backed off. I drank more. I stopped asking questions because the answers made me feel controlling and suspicious, and like I was sabotaging the only good thing in my life. 10 months in, and my retirement fund had gone from comfortable to concerning. I'd burned through nearly $70,000, a number that made me physically ill when I finally forced myself to calculate it. The coffee shop still hadn't materialized. Nook's mother apparently needed another procedure, smaller this time, just $3,000. Her brother needed help with rent because he'd lost his job. The condo needed repairs that our landlord wouldn't cover. Every month there was something. Every month I said yes. Every month I told myself this was the last time. Next month we'd get back on track. I started having panic attacks, proper ones, where my chest would tighten and I couldn't breathe, and I'd have to sit down wherever I was until it passed. They always came when I was alone, never when Nook was around, like my body was trying to tell me something my brain refused to acknowledge. I'd be at the cafe with the boys, laughing about something stupid, and suddenly I couldn't get enough air, and I'd have to excuse myself and walk it off. I'd be in the shower, and the walls would close in, and I'd sit on the floor under the water trying to remember how to inhale properly. The boys at the cafe started looking different to me. Roger with his endless visa stories. I realised he'd been in the same apartment for 5 years, never upgraded, always talking about saving money. Frank, whose wife had died, I started wondering if he was running from grief or just buying a temporary distraction. Tom and his girlfriend, who was supposedly studying nursing, except Tom let slip one day she'd been studying for 3 years and still hadn't taken any exams. We were all the same, sitting in our air-conditioned, bubble-drinking coffee we couldn't really afford, pretending we'd found paradise while our bank accounts drained and our families back home wrote us off as pathetic. I stopped calling my kids entirely. What was I going to tell them? That they'd been right, that I'd pissed away their inheritance on a fantasy, that their old man was exactly the cliché they'd warned me about. My daughter had sent a few emails in the first months, careful ones, asking how I was doing, saying she hoped I was happy. I'd responded with cheerful lies about how great everything was, how in love I was, how I'd finally found where I belonged. After a while, she stopped asking, and I stopped pretending to have updates worth sharing. Nook started being gone more, visiting friends, helping her mother, running errands for the coffee shop that never seemed to progress. She'd leave in the morning and come back at night, vague about where she'd been. Her phone always face down on the table, passwords on everything. When I'd ask, she'd say I was being paranoid, that she needed space, that healthy relationships didn't involve tracking each other's every movement. And she was right, wasn't she? I didn't want to be that guy, the controlling foreigner who treated his Thai girlfriend like property, so I swallowed my suspicions and poured another drink and told myself I was being crazy. Then came the week that shattered everything. Nook said she was going to visit her mother up country. Her mum wasn't feeling well, needed help around the house. She'd be gone for a week, maybe longer. She packed a small bag, kissed me goodbye, told me to take care of myself, said she'd call every day. The first 2 days she did call, brief conversations. She sounded tired, said her mother was stable but needed attention, that she missed me, that she'd be back soon. Day 3, no call. I messaged, no response until late that night, just a text saying, sorry, busy day, talk tomorrow. Day 4, nothing. Day 5, I was climbing the walls, the panic attacks coming twice a day now, drinking whiskey at 10 in the morning just to function. Day 6, I rented a car. I drove north, 4 hours to her village, the same route we'd taken months before. I told myself I was just checking in, just making sure everything was okay, that I wasn't being controlling, I was being caring. The road seemed longer this time, every kilometre giving me more time to rehearse what I'd say, how I'd explain showing up unannounced. I found the house just before sunset. Her mother was outside feeding the chickens, same tiny weathered woman, same gentle smile when she saw me. I tried my broken Thai, asked for Nook, and her mother looked confused. She called to a neighbour who spoke some English, a young woman who translated. Her mother was asking why I was looking for Nook here. Nook hadn't been home in months, not since the last time I visited. The world tilted. I asked again, slower, thinking there was a translation error. The neighbour confirmed it. Nook's mother hadn't seen her, wasn't expecting her, had no idea she was supposed to be visiting. Then her mother said something else, and the neighbour translated, and that's when my heart actually stopped. Her mother was asking if there was a problem with the money, because Nook's husband, the Farang who sent money every month, he was still sending. It wasn't he, because her mother depended on it for her medicine. Nook's husband, not boyfriend, husband. I asked who she meant. The neighbour looked uncomfortable, translated back and forth with the mother, then said there was another Farang, older than me, German maybe, who'd been sending money for over a year, who Nook had said she was married to. I don't remember the drive back to Chiang Mai. I must have thanked them, must have gotten in the car, must have navigated 4 hours of dark roads, but I have no memory of it. I just remember pulling up outside our condo as the sun was rising, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel, my mind racing through every conversation, every request for money, every promise Nook had made. She came back 2 days later. I was sitting in the living room, sober for the first time in months because I needed to be clear for this. She walked in with her bag, started to smile, saw my face and stopped. I asked her where she'd been. She said her mother's, like we discussed. I told her I'd been to her mother's, watched her face change, watched the calculations happen behind her eyes. She tried denial first, said I'd gone to the wrong house, must have confused her mother with an aunt. When I told her about the neighbour who translated, she switched tactics, said her mother was old and confused, didn't know what she was saying. When I brought up the German husband, she went quiet. Then she started crying. Real tears, or as real as anything about us had ever been. Said it wasn't what I thought, said the German guy was old news, someone she'd helped before me, that yes, she'd exaggerated about visiting her mother, but only because she'd been visiting friends and didn't want me to feel jealous. Said I was twisting everything, making her feel like a criminal when all she'd done was love me. I asked about the coffee shop. Where was it? When could I see it? She got angry then. Started yelling about how I didn't trust her, how I was like every other Farang who thought Thai women were all scammers, how she'd given me the best months of her life. And this was how I repaid her. She said Thai culture was about patience, about trust, about not demanding receipts and proof like some accountant. She turned it around so smoothly, I almost believed her, almost apologised, almost fell back into the pattern of making her feelings my responsibility. But I couldn't. Not this time. I asked her for one number. How much had I given her total? Across everything, the medical bills, the motorcycle, the coffee shop, the rent, the phone, the wedding gift, the emergencies, all of it. She refused to answer. Said it was insulting. Said real love didn't keep score. I told her I'd calculated it myself. $70,000 in less than 18 months. She went pale. Started crying harder. Said she could explain everything. That the coffee shop was real. It was just delayed. That her family really did need help. That yes, maybe she'd exaggerated some costs, but it was because she was ashamed to admit how poor her family was. Didn't want me to think less of her. I asked her about the German, about how many others there were. She grabbed her bag, said she wouldn't be interrogated like this, that if I couldn't trust her then we had nothing. She left that night, took everything I'd bought her, clothes and jewellery and the laptop and the new phone, blocked me online, on Facebook, on WhatsApp, every platform we'd used to talk. I sat in that condo for 3 days, our condo, the one I'd paid for, surrounded by the furniture we'd picked out together, the kitchen where we'd cooked, the balcony where we'd had our morning coffee. I kept expecting her to come back, to apologise, to give me some explanation that made sense. On the 4th day, one of the other expats from the cafe, Frank, came by. He'd heard through the grapevine that Nook and I had split. He sat with me, didn't say much at first, just sat there while I stared at the wall. Eventually, he told me his own version, how his Thai girlfriend had disappeared 6 months ago with $40,000, how he'd found out later she'd had 3 other foreign boyfriends at the same time, each one thinking he was special, each one funding a different part of her life. He said he was telling me because someone should have told him, and because staying bitter would kill me faster than the money loss. He said I had 2 choices, leave Thailand and go home, broke and humiliated, or stay and figure out how to live with what I'd learned. A mutual acquaintance, one of the waitresses from Lucky's where I'd first met Nook, reached out a week later. She was kind about it, gentle, but she told me what everyone apparently already knew. Nook had a rotation of foreign men, had for years, usually 2 or 3 at a time, sometimes more. Different nationalities, different ages, all of us middle-aged and lonely and convinced we were different. The German was real, still sending money, still thinking he was her husband. There was also a British guy who'd set her up in a second apartment I'd never known about. The coffee shop had never existed. The business plans were templates she'd downloaded. The location photos were from someone else's cafe. She'd made nearly $150,000 off various men in the last 2 years alone. I wasn't special. I wasn't even particularly unusual. I was just another revenue stream that had finally run dry. The receipt I found cleaning out her stuff, the one she'd dropped and forgotten, was for a gold necklace from a jewelry store in Bangkok. 18,000 baht, about $700, purchased the same day I'd transferred money for her mother's second operation. The necklace I'd never seen her wear because she'd probably given it to one of the other boyfriends, or sold it, or saved it for herself. I moved out of the condo into a studio apartment on the other side of town, somewhere cheaper, somewhere without memories. Cut my rent down to $400 a month, started cooking my own meals, stopped going to the expat cafes because I couldn't stand the other men's carefully maintained delusions. I picked up some online teaching work, English lessons for Chinese students, pays barely enough to cover expenses, but it's something. My retirement fund is gutted. The money that was supposed to carry me through my 60s and 70s is gone, spent on a fantasy I bought wholesale and a woman who was never really mine. My kids don't talk to me. Linda was right about everything, and I'll never hear the end of it if I ever go back to Perth. I'm 58 years old, living in a foreign country, teaching English in my underwear to teenagers on the other side of the world, still in Thailand because I can't afford to leave and too ashamed to go home. But here's the thing I've learned, the thing that took me months of sitting alone in the studio to understand. Thailand didn't ruin me. Nook didn't ruin me. I ruined myself. I was lonely and I bought companionship. And then I convinced myself it was love, because admitting I was paying for affection hurt less than accepting I was that desperate for someone to care. I saw every red flag and ignored them all, because the alternative was going back to that empty flat in Perth and those silent weekends and the crushing weight of knowing I'd worked my whole life to end up mattering to absolutely no one. Nook gave me exactly what I paid for. Company, attention, the feeling of being needed. The fact that I wanted it to be more doesn't make her a monster. It makes me human. Pathetically, predictably human. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I'm writing it because somewhere out there is another bloke like me, recently divorced, sitting in his flat, scrolling through Thailand forums, reading stories about cheap rent and beautiful women and second chances. And maybe if he reads this, he'll think twice. Not about coming to Thailand, the country's incredible if you come with your eyes open, but about building his entire emotional foundation on someone he barely knows, just because she makes him feel less alone. You can't buy love. You can rent attention. You can purchase companionship. You can fund someone's lifestyle in exchange for them pretending to care. But you can't buy love. And the sooner you accept that, the less it'll cost you to learn it.